Everyone's been watching Squid Game and everyone's been talking about Squid Game. And that made me really keen to turn the focus away from Netflix and talk instead about squid in literature and celebrate their slithery sliminess and their slightly weird, terrifying tentacles and take squid into the world of bibliotherapy away from the possibly deeply disturbing phenomenon that is Squid Game. So I wonder if you are people that have watched Squid Game. Do tell me if you are. Announce yourselves if you are fans of that series. I'm going to just talk about that for a little bit. Helen, great to see you. Are you a Squid Game watcher? I wonder. I wonder how many people have managed not to watch Squid Game who come here tonight. Um, I do just want to talk a little bit about Squid Game before we go on to talk about literature. Tracy, great to see you here too. You did mention earlier that you have watched a bit of Squid Game. I must admit, I couldn't watch the whole thing. My husband did, and he got hooked. I can see how you get hooked, but it was just too grim and hideous for me. And apparently, it was based on the true experience, in a way, of the creator Hwan Dong Hyuk, because he had a very extreme experience of uh, lacking in money and finance when, in the 2009 global economic downturn, he saw the financing for all his projects dry up, and he was compelled to take out loans along with his grandmother and mother, which obviously is nowhere near as extreme as what happens in the series itself. But it obviously did inspire him to start thinking about what happens when you're hideously in debt. And Hwan Dong Hyuk was drawn to the hardcore survivalist games depicted in Japanese and South Korean comic books, and he started to ponder just how bad things could get, and that's why he had the idea for Squid Game, which obviously bears almost no relation to Squid, except for the final game in the series, which is called Squid Game, because the platform where they perform the game is in the shape of a part of a squid. But really, it's a very tenuous connection. And apparently, they were going to call the series Round Six instead of calling it Squid Game, because they thought that non-Korean audiences wouldn't relate to the name Squid Game. They felt that it would be too bizarre and unknown, and so they were going to call it Round Six, which is the final round of the game. But apparently, Squid Game proved to be a very popular name, as we all know. And there is something about the name Squid and the concept of squid that gets you really intrigued, which is why you're joining me tonight, I'm sure, to learn more about squid in literature. So, in Squid Game, the Netflix series, just to talk a tiny bit more about it, the backstory is about the guy, the protagonist's backstory. He's called Seong Gi Hun. It's a fictionalized retelling of the violent 2009 clash between car manufacturer SsangYong and 1,000 of the 2,600 employees that SsangYong laid off, and striking workers stood down a brutal alliance of private security forces and Korean police for 77 days. 30 strikers and a few of their spouses lost their lives, many to suicide during the strike and its aftermath in the Korean courts. So the story was actually based on true violent and terrible events, which were based on the terrible disparity between rich and poor, and the fact that so many people were being laid off and actually losing their livelihood. And that's what inspired the game. But it is a very depressing series to watch, if horribly addictive. Anyway, moving away from that, let's talk about squid. And as you can see tonight, I am dressed as a squid. I happen to have this rather wonderful garment, which I found in my grandparents' attic many years ago. And it is a crocheted affair. Look at those amazing squiddy tentacles. I mean, what were my grandparents up to? Who knows? But anyway, it is a wonderful thing. So just a few facts about squid before we get on to squid literature. Biologists estimate that there are more than 500 species of squid. Apparently, other people say, so don't quote me because I might be wrong on some of these facts. There are 300 species of squid and 300 species of octopus. So maybe when they say 500 species of squid, they're including both. Squid are carnivores. They eat fish, crustaceans, and smaller squid. They have 8 arms, and only the tentacles have suckers. They have 3 hearts. They swim faster than any other invertebrate. They have beaks. Compared to their size, they have the largest eyes of any animal. That's why I've got the enormous eyes. And when you look online and find squid eyes, they can be literally the size of dinner plates, and they are quite disturbing. Squid eyes have inbuilt contact lenses, which they use to protect their eyes and to focus on their prey. Humboldt squid become invisible by turning red, a colour that's virtually invisible underwater, as sunlight does not travel down to the seabed, and many squid can change colour. Deep water squid have glow-in-the-dark organs. So squid are amazing creatures, and they have been much maligned in the world of literature. It was Jules Verne who was one of the first people to write about squid in his novel 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which he wrote, I think, in 1834, which is a long time ago. And the squid that he portrayed in that novel was huge and violent and very malevolent towards humans, which, as I think most people know nowadays, is not actually true. Most squid are, well, all squid are actually benign and want to escape humanity rather than attack. But just a few more squid facts before we get on to the fascinating literature of the squid. Female giant squid are bigger than the males, on average twice the size of males, from the tip of their beaks to the end of their longest tentacles. Giant squid suckers can leave ugly battle scars, and that can affect humans for sure. The giant squid's maximum length is about 43 feet. So not as big as Jules Verne was claiming. He was claiming that the giant squid in his book was about 100 meters. Instead of a tongue, they use a radula, which is an organ residing inside their beaks, covered with 7 rows of denticles, sharp toothy, backwards pointing protrusions. And with the giant squid, there might actually only be one known species, and giant squid are amazing. They have never been seen alive until 2004, which seems amazing. They've only ever seen the washed up squid that have appeared on shore, which always look incredibly disappointing somehow, even though they are amazing, huge, and you get the sense of their incredible nature. They look so rubbery, floppy, and really rather pathetic when they're sadly dead on the shore. Whereas when you see them in the sea, they look massive, powerful, and terrifying. And all the paintings that you see of giant squid, of which there are many, and I'm going to put some up on my Facebook page after this session, they look incredibly terrifying and huge and very, very strong, which of course the tentacles of the squid are not going to be that strong once they're out of the water. So there's a lot of amazing mythology and wrong facts, in fact, about giant squid, and we're only just beginning to understand the barest knowledge and truth about them because they've been so much misunderstood over the years. Giant squid tentacles can regenerate, which is a pretty amazing thought. A giant squid corpse found in Canada in 1968 had a partially regenerated tentacle, which is a pretty groovy thought. They can regrow their tentacles. And an estimated 4 million giant squid get eaten by sperm whales each year because the squid regularly show up inside sperm whale stomachs, which is a pretty crazy thought. And apparently that's a low estimate. Giant squid may have helped give rise to sea serpent legends, which sounds remarkably likely. And 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea grossly overestimates the giant squid's usual weight. Jules Verne's masterpiece 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is still a very impressive read, much loved by readers of all ages. And he did predict the invention of scuba tanks and taser guns, but he did have a few gaffes in terms of the knowledge that he projected, because the squid which attacks in his book, he says that it must weigh between 4,000 and 5,000 pounds, but modern scientists can tell that the heaviest animals weigh around a ton, which would be less than 1,000 pounds. So he got a few things wrong, but he had an amazing imagination, and frankly, that's what matters when it comes to writing novels. All giant squids, and all squids indeed, have 3 hearts, which is a pretty wild thing. And the penises of the giant squid are about a yard long. That's quite a horrifying thought too. And apparently they use their sex organs like syringes, injecting sperm into a female's skin where she stores the cells until her eggs need fertilizing. And when they need fertilizing, the mother squid-to-be pulls the eggs out of storage. Pretty crazy. Also, squid are very fast swimmers, and they use a kind of jet propulsion to move. I'm sure lots of you have seen that on TV when the squid move across the sea at quite amazing speeds. So they are quite... Tracy just commenting on the yard-long penis. That is a really horrifying thought. I think rivaled possibly only by dolphins and whales, which also have rather shocking peni. Yeah, a squid. The penis of a squid is just a really awful thing to imagine. But as I said earlier, don't quote me. These are all facts that I have found through trawling through the internet. And actually, some of my facts have also come from this fantastic book, which is Other Minds, The Octopus and the Evolution of Intelligent Life, which is a really fantastic non-fiction book. And this talks not only about octopuses, but also about squid and other related creatures. And it's full of really interesting facts about these amazing creatures. It does make you completely fall in love with them, and it makes you see them in a much more benign fashion than many of the stories that we're going to be talking about tonight. So, giant squid are remarkable and terrifying creatures. And they do remain very much steeped in folklore, and they are still very much misunderstood despite amazing books like this, because they are very difficult to actually get to study and to go down to the depths where they live, because a lot of these creatures live amazingly deep down, apparently 1,000 meters down, or even 3,000 meters down, which is just unimaginably deep. Here is a cover of Jules Verne's book, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Unfortunately, I don't have the actual book to hand because that's at my parents' house. However, it is a book that I did read at a very formative age, and there is a really superb giant squid scene in the book, which I am going to share with you. And as you can see from the picture, doesn't really look like a giant squid. It looks much more like an octopus. And apparently there is some debate about whether Jules Verne actually meant a squid or an octopus in terms of the translation from the French. So, by the way, there was also a rather great Disney live action film made in 1954 of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I wonder if any of you have seen that. It is quite fun and it does have a really great squid scene. And there was also a silent film in 1916. So this is a book that captured the imagination from over 100 years ago. Colleen, you're saying that you love that book. Excellent. And Severine, fantastic for you to join me here this evening. I wonder if you've ever read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea in French. Do let us know if you can make a comment. So, going on to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, I do want to read you a little section of it because it is actually very exciting when the squid appears, and it's actually called The Battle in the chapter when the squid appears. Oh, and I've got another picture that I can show you here, which is the squid, the giant squid appearing in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea when the squid appears in the window of the Nautilus, which is the submarine which they're all travelling in. So there was a prophetic conversation about the sea monsters earlier in the book, and Captain Nemo decides that they must go to the surface and battle with the enormous creature which they now know is there. And when they get to the surface, the hatch is ripped open by a squid and a gigantic tentacle thrusts into the room. Nemo cuts it right off with his axe. Soon the monster grabs a sailor and lifts him into the air while the poor fellow screams for help. The others stab and cut at the squid, and eventually, with only one tentacle left, it squirts ink and disappears. So I'm just going to read you a little bit from that scene. Finally, an actual event, Ned Land said. An indisputable event, my gallant Ned. Accordingly, people have proposed naming this devilfish Bougier's squid. And how long was it? The Canadian asked. Didn't it measure about 6 meters? Said Conseil, who was stationed at the window and examining anew the crevices in the cliff. Precisely, I replied. Wasn't its head, Conseil went on, crowned by 8 tentacles that quivered in the water like a nest of snakes? Precisely. Weren't its eyes prominently placed and considerably enlarged? Yes, Conseil. And wasn't its mouth a real parrot's beak, but of fearsome size? Correct, Conseil. With all due respect to Master, Conseil replied serenely, if this isn't Bougier's squid, it's at least one of his close relatives. I stared at Conseil. Ned Land rushed to the window. What an awful animal, he exclaimed. I stared in my turn and couldn't keep back a moment of revulsion. Before my eyes there quivered a horrible monster worthy of a place among the most far-fetched teratological legends. It was a squid of colossal dimensions, fully 8 meters long. It was travelling backward with tremendous speed in the same direction as the Nautilus. It gazed with enormous staring eyes that were tinted sea green. Its 8 arms, or more accurately feet, were rooted in its head, which has earned these animals the name cephalopod. Its arms stretched a distance twice the length of its body and were writhing like the serpentine hair of the Furies. You could plainly see its 250 suckers arranged over the inner sides of its tentacles and shaped like semispheric capsules. Sometimes these suckers fastened onto the lounge window by creating vacuums against it. The monster's mouth, a beak made of horn and shaped like that of a parrot, opened and closed vertically. Its tongue, also of horn substance and armed with several rows of sharp teeth, would flicker out from between these genuine shears. What a freak of nature! A bird's beak on a mollusk! Its body was a spindle shaped and swollen in the middle, a fleshy mass that must have weighed 20,000 to 25,000 kilograms. Its unstable colour would change with tremendous speed as the animal grew irritated, passing successively from bluish grey to reddish brown. What was irritating the mollusk? No doubt the presence of the nautilus, even more fearsome than itself, and which it couldn't grip with its mandibles or the suckers on its arms. And yet, what monsters these devilfish are! What vitality our Creator has given them! What vigour in their movements! Thanks to their owning a triple heart! Sheer chance had placed us in the presence of this squid, and I didn't want to lose this opportunity to meticulously study such a cephalopod specimen. I overcame the horror that its appearance inspired in me, picked up a pencil, and began to sketch it. I would hope that all of you in that situation would also immediately grab a pencil and sketch that giant squid, though more likely you would probably be grabbing your phones and filming it, as we are in the 21st century. Bill and Jenny, great to see you. Jenny, I'm sure you would be grabbing your pencil and sketching that giant squid, because you would be seizing the moment to create some art. By then, the Nautilus had returned to the surface of the waves. Stationed on the top steps, one of the seamen undid the bolts of the hatch, but he had scarcely unscrewed the nuts when the hatch flew up with tremendous violence, obviously pulled open by the suckers on a devilfish's arm. Instantly, one of those long arms glided like a snake into the opening, and 20 others were quivering above. With a sweep of the axe, Captain Nemo chopped off this fearsome tentacle, which slid writhing down the steps. Just as we were crowding each other to reach the platform, 2 more arms lashed the air, swooped on the seaman stationed in front of Captain Nemo, and carried the fellow away with irresistible violence. Captain Nemo gave a shout and leapt outside. We rushed after him. What a scene! Seized by the tentacle and glued to its suckers, the unfortunate man was swinging in the air at the mercy of this enormous appendage. He gasped, he choked, he yelled, "Help! Help!" These words, pronounced in French, left me deeply stunned. So I had a fellow countryman on board, perhaps several. I'll hear his harrowing plea the rest of my life. The poor fellow was done for. Who could tear him from such a powerful grip? Even so, Captain Nemo rushed at the devilfish and with a sweep of the axe hewed one more of its arms. His chief officer struggled furiously with other monsters crawling up the Nautilus's sides. The crew battled with flailing axes. The Canadian, Conseil, and I sank our weapons into these fleshy masses. An intense, musky odour filled the air. It was horrible. For an instant, I thought the poor man entwined by the devilfish might be torn loose from its powerful suction. 7 arms out of 8 had been chopped off. Brandishing its victim like a feather, one lone tentacle was writhing in the air. But just as Captain Nemo and his chief officer rushed at it, the animal shot off a spout of blackish liquid, secreted by a pouch located in its abdomen. It blinded us. When this cloud had dispersed, the squid was gone, and so was my poor fellow countryman. What rage then drove us against these monsters? We lost all self-control. 10 or 12 devilfish had overrun the Nautilus's platform and sides. We piled helter-skelter into the thick of these sawed-off snakes, which darted over the platform amid waves of blood and sepia ink. It seemed as if these viscous tentacles grew back like the many heads of Hydra. At every thrust, Ned Land's harpoon would plunge into a squid's sea-green eye and burst it. But my daring companion was suddenly toppled by the tentacles of a monster he could not avoid. Oh, my heart nearly exploded with excitement and horror. The squid's fearsome beak was wide open over Ned Land. The poor man was about to be cut in half. I ran to his rescue, but Captain Nemo got there first. His axe disappeared between the two enormous mandibles, and the Canadian, miraculously saved, stood and plunged his harpoon all the way into the devilfish's triple heart. Tit for tat, Captain Nemo told the Canadian. I owed it to myself. Ned bowed without answering him. This struggle had lasted a quarter of an hour. Defeated, mutilated, battered to death, the monsters finally yielded to us and disappeared beneath the waves. Red with blood, motionless by the beacon, Captain Nemo stared at the sea that had swallowed one of his companions, and large tears streamed from his eyes. That's an epic scene from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, written by Jules Verne in 1864. And it's a scene that still has an amazing power to enthrall and grip us. And actually, Jules Verne did know a lot about squid. He got quite a few of his facts right, like the three hearts and the tentacles that are able to regrow themselves, even though it wouldn't have happened quite so fast. But in reality, squid would never be that aggressive. But it does make a really fantastic story, let's face it. And I think a couple of people have, you, Colleen, you said that you've seen the film, and it's great, which I have only seen snippets, and I am going to watch it this week. Sharon, thanks for joining us tonight. I wonder if you're a fan of squid in literature, and if so, do you have any favourites? So, another interesting kind of squid in literature is H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu, which I'm sorry, I couldn't uh, bring an image of that tonight, but you could look it up. There's some quite awesome pictures of Cthulhu online. And H.P. Lovecraft describes a statue of Cthulhu as a monster of vaguely anthropoid outline, but with an octopus like head, whose face was a mass of feelers, a scaly, rubbery looking body, prodigious claws on hind and forefeet, and long, narrow wings behind. So Cthulhu is not a squid, but Cthulhu is said to resemble a green octopus, a dragon, and a human caricature, hundreds of meters tall, with webbed, human looking arms and legs and a pair of rudimentary wings on its back. Its head is depicted as being similar to a gigantic octopus with an unknown number of tentacles surrounding its supposed mouth. So, The Call of Cthulhu by H.P. Lovecraft was first published in 1928 in a volume called Weird Tales, and this established the character as a malevolent entity hibernating in an underwater city in the South Pacific. And the imprisoned Cthulhu is apparently the source of constant subconscious anxiety for all mankind, and is also the object of worship, both by many human cults and by other Lovecraftian monsters called the Deep Ones. So Lovecraft created a whole kind of mythology around Cthulhu, um, which was a little bit squid related, but not by any means pure squid. I'm going to leap from Lovecraft to Ian Fleming, because Ian Fleming has a rather wonderful squid scene in his James Bond book, Dr. No, which is actually a really great and exciting novel. Most of the novels that I'm talking about this evening are very much dramatic, exciting novels, on the lines of the Jules Verne, and Dr. No is no exception to that rule. It has a torture loving villain, a feisty female lead, and death defying feats, including a battle with a giant squid. And Dr. No sees Fleming revelling in the dramatic appeal of his indestructible hero. However, in Dr. No, the book, James Bond is a much more vulnerable and interesting character than he is in the film. In the film, he becomes really a bit too invulnerable, and you know that he's always going to survive. But in the books, you do see the side of him which does get knocked down and might not get up again. So I would really recommend, if you've never read any of the James Bond books, have a go. They are good reads. So in this book, Dr. No, James Bond has recently recovered from his near fatal poisoning at the end of From Russia with Love, and Bond is sent to Jamaica for a working holiday. To his annoyance, his mission, which is to investigate the disappearance of two fellow MI6 operatives, sounds rather like The Soft Life. But soon, James Bond is obviously getting caught into a very exciting and dramatic world of villains and disaster. And I'm just leaping ahead to a little bit more about Dr. No. Just to give you a little bit more background about Ian Fleming himself, the Bond novels were actually born in Jamaica, which is where Dr. No is set. Returning from a wartime conference there in 1943, Fleming declared, "When we've won this blasted war, I'm going to live in Jamaica. Just live in Jamaica and lap it up, and swim in the sea and write books." True to his word, he built Goldeneye, a cliff-top estate on the north coast, and wrote his novels there. Dr. No is scattered with evocative descriptions of one of the most fertile islands in the world. Its stuffy velvet heat, night-scented jasmine, and violet shadows, bringing the island to vivid life as the setting for one of Fleming's most revered novels. And I would really recommend it. It does have a really great villain whose arms have been cut off by his enemies. He is a very dubious and rather awful character who there's lots of complications about him, because I think his heart is on the wrong side of his body, and although this villain gets shot through the heart, he survives because his heart's on the other side of the body, to which you would expect. Anyway, there's lots of exciting and terrible dramas, and it all comes to a head when James Bond has this fantastic fight with a giant squid, and he manages to overcome it, but actually not through being particularly manly and brilliant. He does have moments of weakness, and he makes a few slightly dubious moves in order to escape the squid, and I think he actually has to dive into a underground tunnel to escape it at one point. It's all very exciting, and the heroine who he thinks that he's going to rescue also manages to rescue herself. So the James Bond novels are not always as sexist as you imagine that they might be. Anyway, have a read of Dr. No if you get a chance, because it's a quick and exciting novel to read. Another great novel with a fantastic squid in it is The Beast by Peter Benchley, who is the writer of Jaws. And The Beast was not such an epic success as Jaws was, but it was nonetheless a very exciting novel, which was also made into a film. And somebody quoted that the beast makes the shark from Jaws look like a pet goldfish. There's this creature, which is a giant squid, is an immense horror, a creature that rises up from the well of an ocean gone mad with an insatiable hunger and an endless lust to kill. One man leads a harrowing struggle to defeat the beast amid a threatened Bermuda paradise. So it's set in Bermuda, which is always a joy because it makes it all the more exciting. And this man, who is the one that's attempting to defeat the giant squid, the beast, is called Whip Darling, a down and out sea dog who doesn't know where he'll get his next meal or whether it will get him first. So it's a classic adventure novel, a great story, genuinely fear inspiring, and really quite icky in places with icky squiddiness. And it very much keeps you on the edge of your seat. But it was also, to some degree, taken from life because Peter Benchley did indeed go to Bermuda to hunt for giant squid, but found that the creature, which never actually showed itself, was apparently strong enough to cut through his baited steel cable lines and sink the buoys that kept them afloat. I wonder if that's actually true. You can read this in his autobiographical book, Shark Life, for more details on these adventures. This is Peter Benchley, who wrote Jaws, who obviously did have a lot of really fantastic adventures. Benchley also did make a few mistakes, like Jules Verne, because he claimed that the giant squid grew to 100 feet, when in reality, apparently, it's about 43 feet. Um, and he also claimed that giant squid attack people, which we all know they're not actually vindictive. The impression that you get from this book is that cephalopods, octopuses, and squid are actually very benign, curious, and probably even imaginative creatures who spend a lot of time creating symphonies of colour on their skin. So, The Beast by Peter Benchley, it's not only the story of a giant man-eating squid who terrorises Bermuda, but it is also the human story of Whip Darling, who is a proud yet impoverished man doing what he needs to do to get by. So we very much sympathise with him. And I think that's what Peter Benchley's great at, and also what he's really good at in Jaws, is that you do sympathise with the humans in the story, very much so. Now, another one, I think pretty much all of these stories that I'm talking about tonight are highly dramatic and exciting, is Sphere by Michael Crichton, who is the writer responsible for Jurassic Park and many other brilliant and highly successful novels which have been made into films, as indeed has this one, Sphere. And this is about a group of scientists who travel to a deep sea habitat at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, where an enormous spacecraft has been discovered. Now, this is quite a complicated story, and I'm just going to tell you a bit about it because it does pay finding out what happens, because I think it's rather wonderful and imaginative and a great idea for a story which does involve giant squid. So the story is told through the eyes of scientist Levine, who becomes claustrophobic when he is descending to the bottom of the sea in order to see this spacecraft that's landed in the ocean. And he goes back to the surface. The other scientists do arrive safely at the bottom of the sea, and um, they do investigate the spacecraft, and partly humans and partly robots have to go and investigate what is going on in this strange spacecraft at the bottom of the sea. So as the robots' cameras focus on the opened panel, so they manage to open a panel at the bottom of the sea, labels in English indicate the spacecraft is actually a US spacecraft constructed in the future and sent through time, appearing on the seabed at least 350 years before its creation. So we've got an element of time travel as well as exciting squid action to come. The robot is unable to open a hatch leading further inside, forcing the team to don pressure suits and explore the spacecraft. And in the cargo hold, the team discovers a mysterious spherical object that's clearly of extraterrestrial origin, hence the title of the book, The Sphere. Reasoning that the ship's future builders were apparently unaware that it had already been found in their past, Adams, who's one of the heroes of the book, becomes convinced that the team will not survive to report their discovery. So this book does really mess with your head in terms of time travel concepts, but in a really clever way. Remaining behind after the rest of the team returns to the habitat, Adam succeeds in opening and entering the sphere. Meanwhile, on the surface, a Pacific cyclone forces the supporting naval ships to evacuate, trapping and isolating the scientists on the ocean floor for 5 days. So I'm not going to give you the whole plot because it is all very exciting and really good. This is The Sphere by Michael Crichton. But while they are unable to communicate with other people, members of the team start to die in various attacks by giant squid, and the dwindling band of survivors struggle in their dealings with the unthinkably powerful, childlike, and temperamental alien entity. And what I love about this book, The Sphere, is that we slowly discover that the giant squid are actually products of the imagination, but they do take on real aspects and the ability to hurt people. And they have been created out of the imagining of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So they are an imaginative representation made flesh from an imagined idea by Jules Verne. So this is fiction writing about fiction that has been made manifest. And I think that's a really great meta concept. Sorry, just dropped my tea, just picking that up. Which makes the book go from being a kind of adventure story, a bit like Jurassic Park, taking it to a whole new level where it's something really very thought-provoking and rather fab. So moving on from Michael Crichton, another great squid book of a more recent era is Kraken by China Mieville. And China Mieville is an author who I love and quite often talk about his book, The City and the City, which is one of my favourite kind of sci-fi type books, which is really interesting. And it's one in which two cities coexist within the same plane. And as somebody walking through the city, you can actually walk from one city to the next simply by changing your way of walking. And so the two cities are constantly overlaying each other. And I just love that idea and think it's brilliant. And that's one of my favourite books by China Mieville, The City and the City. But he's also written many other fantastic books, including Kraken, which won the Locus Award for Best Science Fiction Novel. It's a darkly comic, wildly absurd adventure, which discusses a giant squid, which was kept in the Natural History Museum in London, deep in a research wing. It's a prize specimen, something that comes along much less often than once in the lifetime, a perfect and perfectly preserved giant squid. But what does it mean when this giant squid suddenly and impossibly disappears? For curator Billy Harrow, it's the start of a headlong pitch into a London of warring cults, surreal magic, apostates, and assassins. It might just be that the creature that he's been preserving is more than a biological rarity. There are people who are convinced that it's a god. So that's Kraken by China Mieville. It's kind of too complicated a story to go into any depth about, but it is a story that has a lot of really fantastic ideas around it. It's got ideas about angels, gods, demon-like creatures, magic. It's in a way slightly reminiscent of Neil Gaiman, um, American Gods or London Under, but it does have this really fantastic entity in it, which is the giant squid. And I just love that concept in so many books. So I've talked about a few fantastic squid related books this evening. There's, of course, the classic Jules Verne, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, The Beast by Peter Benchley, The Kraken by China Mieville, and what was the other one? Oh, yes, there is also a non-fiction book. So I've mentioned this one, which is a really excellent, very beautifully written and thought-provoking book about the brain of an octopus and a squid. But then there's also, so that's a modern one. In 1994, there was a book called Monsters of the Sea, written by Roger Ellis, which was all about different monsters of the sea. And the writer then got so excited about the giant squid that he wrote another book called The Search for the Giant Squid, which is partly writing about museum models of giant squid. And Ellis gathered material for his book by speaking to a giant squid expert when the expert was going on an expedition to New Zealand in search of the giant squid. But there was an amazing lack of genuine knowledge about information on the giant squid. And Ellis said, there's not that much known, but there's a lot you can write about what's not known, why it isn't known, and who doesn't know it. And I think that's a really great premise for a book, writing about all the things that you don't really know about the search for the giant squid. But apparently Ellis wrote The Search for the Giant Squid as a way of dispelling some of the crazy ideas that this cephalopod is in any way dangerous to humans. So he did dispel lots of those myths, which were the stuff of fantastic fiction in the hands of many of the people that I've been talking about this evening. So I'm doing a slightly shorter session tonight. I'm going to end it there. Next week, I will be returning on Damien Barr's Literary Salon Facebook page and Instagram. And I will be talking about autumn in literature, seeing as we are now well into that season. And I wonder if you have any favourite autumnal novels or short stories or poems that you'd like to mention. Do tell me if you have any up your sleeve or that you'd love to mention or share with us. And I will then mention them next week as well. So have a fantastic week. It's been great seeing you, and enjoy all those squid in fiction. Hopefully, far more than you might have enjoyed Squid Game. And thanks so much for joining me this evening. See you soon. Good night.